So, hello and welcome. My name is Steve Pugh, and on Mondays, I do something called a growth strategy podcast where I try and introduce you to really interesting people that can help your business or career. So, I was first introduced to Anthony about a month ago. He kindly came up to Newcastle on a Saturday, I might add, to give a talk about SeedLegals and what they do. And actually, Patricia that gave his intro, I sat and I think it was about a 2 hour event. It was fabulous, really great guy. And then actually, it wasn't long afterwards, I thought, I need to get this guy in the podcast. He's got such an incredible story to tell. But also with there's so much change that's going on in the world at the moment, with banking sector, the finance sector, you have startups who might be less confident now than they were about where's their money going to come from, or people are going to be more risk averse. That in theory, this could be the perfect interview at the perfect time. So Anthony, I will always let introduce in his own words, but if you join us for the next 40 minutes or so, I know it'll be a really great conversation as well. And if you want to catch up afterwards, we do all of this on YouTube, on the Roadmap MBA YouTube channel, and you'll be able to find it on socials as well. So there we go. People can now see you and hear you.
All right. So, Steve, thank you so much for the kind intro. Hello, everyone. I'm Anthony Rose. I'm founder and CEO at SeedLegals. Once upon a time, I used to head up BBC iPlayer. That seems like a lifetime ago now. Then after the BBC, I built a startup, sold it, built another startup, sold it, invested in a couple, got tired of paying lawyers, met my co-founder, Laura, genius ex-VC and serial angel investor, started SeedLegals in late 2016, and we're now 150 people.
Wow.
About 1 in 3 of all early stage funding rounds in the UK is now done on SeedLegals. And as part of that, I talk to a lot of founders. I see a lot of pitch decks, and I see lots of founders on their journey. Some go better than others, and I'm delighted to share my experiences so that you can get there faster. So that's the intro
It
from
feels like
me.
you've done this before. It's funny
The
because
art
when
of the pitch, the art of the pitch and the art of the presentation is one of the key things founders need to master, and we can go through my baptism of fire on that if we get to it.
No, it sounds brilliant. And what's quite funny, so I did a school's careers day on Friday. So this is to people aged 14 to 18, just about general stuff, but for me it was about startups. And it's funny because when you say the same thing 200 times, you do get to tweak and change and change. And it's you, but you can tell as someone that's when someone's really well rehearsed, if that makes sense. So I respect the hustle and grind. And this is one of my big things is that when I go through my own career, anyone that you can tell has done the miles, has done the reps, has been there and done it, I personally have a lot of respect for that. You're always going to get the odd person that gets rich quick and has one idea that flies at 17. But actually, it's the things like when people practice pitching and practice stuff, I have massive kind of respect for. So I was going to say, would you like to introduce yourself? But you've kind of already smashed that one, which is cool. Is it correct that you grew up in South Africa?
Yep, I'm from Cape Town, sunny Cape Town, and always questing for the sun in London. But yes.
Because one of the other presenters on our channel, Ashley, is also South African. And what I always find funny is that, I don't know about you, but as I've gone through my life, you seem to, so we do a lot of work in Nigeria as well, where Tony, who's another presenter on the channel, is Nigerian. But you seem to just gravitate to different people from different parts of the world, and they seem to kind of come together. And same, I know a guy called Craig that runs Google in the UK and Europe, Craig Fenton, and he says the same about people from New Zealand, is that they all seem to just coalesce together. So what were you like at school?
I was probably the reclusive, but this is like the way back machine. I was probably more the reclusive person at school, I must say. So when I was a kid, I was into computers at a very early age, before computers were a thing. Like I had like the world's first computers pre-Apple. I built my own computer.
Wow.
And actually, for me, I like nothing more, don't know if this is good or bad, than to head home as soon as possible after school and get back to designing electronics. So when I was at school, I had my own electronics business
Wow.
and built circuit boards, which I sold to Apple in South Africa, and data loggers that would go down mines and the works. So I guess I was an entrepreneur before, startups were a thing, really. This was quite a few years ago.
What age was this?
I was 16 or
Wow.
so, maybe even 15. This was like in the 1980s, so way back. So, I mean, startups, there was no such thing as, fundraising for startups back then. There was no government tax incentives. I mean, it was South Africa. So I think one of the interesting things that I learned quite quickly that you have to run it as a proper business. In other words, you have to make enough
Make
money
some
to
money.
cover your expenses because no one's just going to give you £500,000. And I think that's been a very good discipline since then, in terms of running Seed Legals, as cash flow break even, sometimes up, sometimes down. But rather than you're going to raise lots of money and then
Yep.
hemorrhage
Yep.
lots of money, and then when times are bad and fundraising's difficult, then the company has really hard times.
Can I ask, do you think that's a generational thing? I'm a little bit younger than you, so I was born in '83. But it's almost where, so I'm still in the millennial generation, but it was almost where for a lot of my life, and especially I grew up in a city called Liverpool, but it was a fairly blue collar working class town. But it was almost where you had to pay your own way, feed your own, feast, I guess. And it was that balance of where, do you feel that because in the past 10, 12 years where interest rates and things have been so low, that we have a whole generation now of people that are 10 to 25 or so that grew up when entrepreneurship was cool and startups were cool, but
Yeah,
almost the approach was get an idea, fundraise, then do it, as opposed to maybe a few years ago it would have been make it work, make some money, then grow it. Does that make sense? Almost, one
yeah,
is
no, absolutely. And I love the great, really democratization. Some might argue it's not quite democratization, it's moving the pieces around, but the board is still stacked. But I think it's very much a democratization. And that's very much my purpose and mission, both personally and at Seed Legals, to allow people with ideas, whether whatever race, gender, and so on, to be able to fulfill
mm,
those and build it. And once upon a time, Britain was classist. If your father worked at the mill, you'd work at the mill, and there was very little chance to break out of that.
yeah,
And then it became easier. Potentially, the stigma was removed, but it was harder logistically. You couldn't borrow money from the bank until you had money. And then, the rise of equity fundraising and then crowdfunding and now angel investment, which means that it is possible and without huge amounts of difficulty, that if you have an idea and you can sell the concept and
mhm,
you can express yourself, that really everyone is now potentially a founder or creator. And welcome to the new creator economy. But it does lead to a different problem, which is I saw some survey that said something like 27% of people leaving school said they want to do a startup or be a founder. And that's up from 2% a
mhm.
decade ago. So the question is, and I see lots of founders, are 27% of people really founder material? So what does founder material be? And this is not to deny anyone the innate right to go off and be a founder, but when I think as a founder, key attribute is you have to love
Mhm,
making decisions
mhm,
and weighing up risk rewards. And if you don't want to make decisions or don't want to take risks, it's not the life for you. And you also, once you have an idea, you have to do everything you can to make it work. So relying on the handouts of others or going, I can't deal with this, can someone else own it? Are just not an option, right? So you've got investors to give you money, you've got people to follow you on your mission, and now you can't get up in the morning and go, it's kind of hard. I'd like to can I give my baby
yeah,
back again, please? I'm bored, is not an option. So yes, I think it's really important that as someone watching or listening to this, you look within. If you're thinking, should I give up my day job and become a founder? Of course, there is the possibility, and I love to make it super easy for you. You have to still find investment,
mhm,
persuade people to invest, but the tools legally to do that are so much easier these days. But the question is that going to fit your mentality,
mhm,
or are you going to find it, a constant frustration? And I look, for example, at myself when there are things like Brexit or Ukraine war or COVID. It's not to like gleefully say it's an opportunity because
mhm.
there are problems for many people, but your starting point is thinking the world has changed. It's not that, Twitter lights up with people frustrated with the uncertainty. In fact, uncertainty, if you thrive on it,
Mm-hmm.
cut out for being a founder. Anyway, end soliloquy on being a founder.
But what I find fascinating, and it's part of the reason why I love to ask people about their backstory, is because often the seeds were sown or are sown at a young age. And you can kind of, tease out what people are like, and you can see the things that can go into roots and really kind of grow on. And then likewise, again, there's a lot of people where some people just don't want to fit into someone else's system. They've always got the itch to scratch and they want to go out on their own. And the one thing that I always think, it's almost you can have a great idea, but it's that desire when things aren't going well and you're not making as much traction as you hoped, just keep going because you inherently love the thing. You love the problem that you're trying to solve. That actually you probably will have more tough days than good ones, because the irony is, I don't know about you, but almost as soon as you have the good blip, you instantly reset to then just accept it and move on. It's almost just what's next. And I think that is almost part of the fun for me of entrepreneurship, is because I don't know where the next 30 years are going to go. But I'm actually very excited that probably for the next 10, not much will happen. But it's that compounding interest.
Hopefully a bit sooner than 10, more like 2. You have to build something, but 10 years is a long time. The median age for company exits is sort of 5 to 7 years. So if you're still sort of on the learning thing 10 years in, you might have wanted to see, could you get there faster? But there's nothing wrong with that, right? And also remember that, companies are not just built to flip. Growing businesses. Once upon a time, people built a cheese shop and it would be in the family 8 generations later. These days, you might build businesses to sell a lot faster than that in a few years. But we may talk about, build to keep or build to sell if we get there.
Oh, I've got you. So what I would normally do is ask people, about their careers and how they built up. But yours is, you're obviously a serial entrepreneur. There's so much really cool stuff to kind of go at. How would you summarize your career journey from kind of school, selling data boards and things at 16? What happened next?
Well, it's quite a rollicking yarn. So I was living in South Africa at the time. I had my own one-person electronics company, which was actually quite profitable in the just build a business, sell things, use the money to buy parts. And I spent the evening soldering things. I had a robot machine for making circuit boards and a big conveyor thing for soldering them in my study at home, not in the bedroom, where I've died of lead poisoning, in the study. And then it was time to move from South Africa, so we moved to Australia, and I began building that again. And then one day, a mutual friend said, the person who runs Sega, the video games company in Australia, doesn't just want to sell other people's games, he wants to build something himself. So he's looking for a CTO. And I thought, what do I know about real-time 3D and software? Well, let's give it a go. So I became CTO at the company. We built a big team, did real-time 3D graphics. I've got a whole lot of patents on it. And then the dot-com crash arrived in the late 90s, and we had to reinvent our business, and we needed distribution. So we connected with Kazaa, the music file sharing company, for those old enough to remember it. And we had our technology bundled with Kazaa, and then the businesses merged, and we became part of Kazaa. Then we got sued by the music companies, and then we settled, and I built a licensed music store in the days before iTunes. And then one day the BBC called and said, how would you like to join the BBC? And I was living in sunny Sydney, and I went, the BBC, where are the stock options? But I was persuaded, and they were looking for someone with media knowledge, and having been with Kazaa and wake up like 16 million downloads in a week. So it was all about building a product that consumers love, and that's what I relish doing. Moved to London, headed up iPlayer, but eventually it was time to move on back to startup days, and then build Zbox, which was a social app around TV, and then built 6 Tribes and invested in a few. So I guess my career has been, solo company, and then 3 disruptive spaces, which I think is fascinating. The first is music, which is moving from physical CDs to online, and the music companies not wanting to change until they were forced to change. And then in video, from moving from watch it on your telly through to watching it on your phone whenever you want. But the broadcasters changed to some extent, but not enough. And now we see the broadcasters are having their lunch eaten
Mm-hmm.
by, first it was the YouTubes and then the Snaps and Facebook video and now TikTok and so
Yeah.
on, because everything is a constant reinvention. And then now it's disruption in the legal field. But in every case, the goal isn't, I mean, some people wake up obsessed with changing the world or disrupting the natural order of things or the existing order of things. But I mean, it's laudable, but I don't personally see that as a great goal.
Mm-hmm.
Your goal is just to build something that your customers will want.
Mm-hmm.
It might just be utility. Don't get ahead of yourself. The faster way to do X, or I want to watch Top Gear whenever I want, not at 9 o'clock only on a Sunday night, or I want to do an investor meets me and I just want to send them a document now on a rainy Sunday, not wait and
Mm-hmm.
phone a lawyer next week. So, find a utility problem that people are looking to solve it in a better way, and then build a business on that.
Can I ask, what is it that drives you? Because everything you've just said, it's almost where I'm guessing there's a desire to problem solve and almost have an impact. Or are you one of these people where you seek out, do you, I was going to say, do you lose interest in things quickly, but do you see a problem and think, I could solve that?
I think there are two interesting parts to the question. Number one is, of course, what's in common with music, video, legal, electronics, and so on. And I think what's in common is what I love to do is build cool stuff.
Yeah.
I like to start with a problem and not know at all how to get there. It's a little bit like being dropped on the desert island, and you know that you have to build a hut or the tigers will eat you and you will die without water, and you kind of that problem to solve, and you have no idea how to get to the solution. But I actually really like that. And everything else in a startup is like stuff you have to do that lets you do that. And to some extent, it doesn't matter what the problem space is, whether it's a legal or video or audio, you're still starting with an idea, and then you need to build it, build the team, get investment and all the things around it. And that's really the piece that I really enjoy.
Because I think with one of the things that you seem to have done incredibly well is you've managed to catch the wave on lots of technology rises. So I remember when I started university in 2002. And at the time, I was still buying CDs. I go to HMV, buy the disc. And then I remember there was various different options, but there was LimeWire was one, and there was and then there was a big thing about when you'd search for Madonna or whatever music taste that you look for, but then half of them would be viruses. And then you'd be worried about, is this illegal? Is it? And there was this big sea change of just change going on. And then almost again with iPlayer, it sounds silly, but I grew up in the generation of Friends, the TV show. And it absolutely blew my mind that at some point you could go on and choose which episode and series. I was like, that's impossible. And then again, the growth in the startup legal world, that in the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen the challenger banks come in that have really disrupted that space. And again, what you guys are doing with legal, it's almost where I think the world goes through reinvention every so often anyway, but you seem to have caught the wave perfectly on quite a few, if that makes sense.
I'd like to think that. I mean, I skipped sorry.
That's okay.
The
Bless you.
Bitcoin blockchain wave, and I don't know if I was late to the party or I just didn't understand it. But I think one of the key things is you like to think that all the things you do are scientifically planned. I'm going to do X and Y. Actually, it turns out a lot of it is fortune, opportunism, and luck. And so, why am I in legal tech? Well, it's because I met my co-founder, Laurent, at a party where he's an ex-VC, and he was saying this problem space, and I was looking for the next thing to do. And you don't, sometimes you read all this VC advice and funding advice on Twitter, and it's like, find something you love and do it. Well, it's very rare that you start off loving, insurance technology or legal technology or manufacturing technology. You don't. You start by finding an interesting problem that you're potentially good at, and then you learn, and not learn as in forced to learn, but you begin to love it. So on SeedLegals, contract automation is not something you kind of fall in love with. What you do fall in love with are thousands, tens of thousands of founders using what you've built. to change the way that they can run their business, and just see how they, are accelerated as a result and could never do the things without platforms like that. And that's the inspiring bit. The fact that there's a tech platform is great. That's the necessary piece, but it's the outcome from that's the exciting piece.
So I could attempt to pitch SeedLegals, but I can tell that you're someone that's done this 20,000 times before. But would you like to, or can you share the dream, share what you do, share what people can buy, and then we'll almost investigate a bit more? Is that okay?
Sure. So, once upon a time, if you want to do a contract, particularly around fundraising or hiring people, you'd go to a law firm and you'd explain what they want, and some number of pounds and days or weeks later, they'd create a document, and then you'd send the document to the other party, and the lawyers would talk to, and the whole thing was slow and painful. And the goal at SeedLegals is to change that. So SeedLegals is a platform and people primarily around fundraising. So the idea is, let's say you've got your startup and you want to raise investment. Well, the UK startup ecosystem is fueled by government tax incentives for angel investors. It's called SEIS, Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, and the EIS scheme. And that means if someone invests personally, they can deduct some of their investment from their tax for this year or last tax year. And in order to do that, you need to get set up and registered and so on. You can do that on SeedLegals. And then you might want to create a pitch page where you can share it on social, and you can do that on SeedLegals. And then, of course, you need to know what fundraising is about, and you need to work out how to value your company. So there's data and video on that. And then you'll find an investor, and the investor would say, I'd like to invest something, and you'll need a contract for that. So really, it's the platform to enable you to know what you want and to execute it. And then later on, when you hire people, you can do the employment contracts and all the other things. So it's not just the paperwork, it's hopefully that cloud of things you need to go and build your business faster.
No, I think it's very true and very needed, I think, as well, because I'm married to a lawyer. So my wife is a partner in a law firm. So I inherently use her law firm when I do stuff, but there's always that element of trust where I reach out to a person. They're often busy, so they often don't reply for a little bit, but then you don't know what the price is going to be. You don't quite sure what you're going to get back. And there's always, it's never great, so I completely get how it works. And then is it a pay-per-play type service, or is it a subscription?
That's right. So there are two parts. There's a subscription for all the little things that you need all the time, employment agreements, NDAs, and then it's a pay per big thing that you need sometimes, like a funding round and so on.
No, I kind of, well, firsthand, I get it for what we do, but what you're always looking for is where can you invest your time, effort, and money to have a multiplier impact, which really helps. And I think one of the big things, especially with young people, but it's true of all ages, if you don't know what to do or where to go, that's a barrier, that's a blocker. So the potential to have a trusted source where, a brand name that can almost solve everything, there's a real value in that, there's a real attraction in that often the unknowns could actually stop someone from trying to raise money because they don't know how big the legal fee is going to be or how it's going to work, or, the fact that you have standard documents and that kind of thing as well is really kind of positive. What's your dream for the business? I know you've been going for quite a few years now and you've done fabulous things and you're in multiple different countries now, but I just wondered for you, where do you want to be in 5-10 years time?
Well, that is an impossibly long time in internet land. I mean, we see the rise of AI now. We didn't even see it this time, but at the beginning of the year. So, the question is then what comes next? I can't gaze that far into the future. I mean, the initial part now is to keep building things that our customers want, expand into other countries, create a product for investors to make it easy for you to find investors and investors to find companies. So, anything else, I guess we'll talk again in a year or two's time.
But I must admit, what you've almost done there is that we mentioned before about how there's been different sea changes in technology, because even when you went to Sega, I remember when they first launched 8-bit games, but that was a new thing, because before that we used to have an Amstrad computer where you would load games on tape and it would take half an hour to load a game, and that moved. But again, so now the launch of large language models and AI where do you think that will go realistically within the next few years? Because there's always the element of where it could go, but then often legislation will hold it back, one might guess. And it was just your own feeling on the chat GPT generation of where we could be in 3 to 5
Yes.
years.
So a few observations. Firstly, I mean, my Twitter is literally 98% filled with people sharing chat GPT things. And I've been impressing on my team that we should use it faster than I like that we are using it. But I do a Monday morning team stand-up for the team on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
So we're all, start the week. And I thought for fun last night, I've used ChatGPT to write my speech for today. So I said, write a stirring 2-minute speech telling about sales performance, the excellent work by the support team, and our recent product developments. And it came up with a little speech, which I posted actually on our Slack channel just as a joke. This is what ChatGPT wrote, because it was, on the one hand, tremendously impressive, on the other hand, seriously meh. It was exactly the management speak that I would never use. It's like, yeah. So, but the whole chat GPT thing is almost, as I'm seeing more and more of it, people are, posting endless amounts of stuff to show how clever it is. But what I'm wondering actually is it's almost saying how stupid we are, because all we are a bunch of tech that takes a database of stuff, repurposes it, and does exactly the same as the
Mm-hmm.
chat GPT is doing. But I mean, jokes aside, the point is, it's an interesting quandary, because when blockchain came out,
Mm-hmm.
there were, a school of thought going, it's going to change everything, but we just need to look for applications for it. And largely, we just didn't find many applications for
Yeah.
it. It remains a triumph of desire over actual. Whereas with Chat GPT, will it turn out to be, there are endless numbers of things it could do, but realistically, I'm still doing my own speech in the morning. My sales team are still doing their same emails.
Mm-hmm.
We're still doing exactly the same things, and we keep it as a fun side thing, or does it change everything? I think in this case, it's going to very much
Mm-hmm.
change a lot, probably not quite as much as people are looking for, because it's a large language model. It's not something else, but it is seriously impressive. And then the question is, how fast should you pivot your
Yeah.
business to be
Yeah.
using it? Do you drop everything and pivot on it? That would be a bit too soon. Do you ignore it? Well, if you could get twice as much done in a day with
Mm-hmm.
some AI assist, I think it'd be remiss of you to not do that. So anyway, just the last piece on that is, one of the things from talking to many founders, one of the things I love doing at SeedLegals is to solve every problem in a scalable way. So I think, what would a law firm do? They would do the same thing again and again. I'm going to put
Excellent.
unbounded capex to solve a problem, but make it a one-click for everyone after that. So every time somebody asks us a problem on our web chat, my co-founders left, or this is happening, or whatever, my goal is, the third time someone asks us a question, we'll
Mm-hmm.
write an article, we'll do a video on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can have the system start suggesting it, or my colleagues, or maybe AI will suggest it. So we've written, and I've written, close to 500 articles on
Wow.
all sorts of things around startup companies, what founders should do in fundraising, the works. And I thought, why not pull that all into a ChatGPT private model,
Mm-hmm.
and then have a chat bot that you can ask it anything. So basically, I put myself out of business answering questions, and my team out of business. Anyway, we took our first trial at it. We couldn't upload the whole model because we
Mm-hmm.
weren't there yet, and the limitations. We did a small model, and it was a great example where the chat GPT system came up. So then my team said, Anthony, please ask it your first question. So I asked it some question where I knew it had a particular technical answer, and it came up with a beautifully written and completely wrong answer. So I was greatly amused. That's the epitome of it, which means you can't let it loose on an unsuspecting world, because instead of, hitting us up on web chat and my team will
Hmm.
tell you a good answer to your problem, you'll have something that will tell you something that looks great and is a disastrously bad thing. So now we have to figure out how to let it loose in a way that is going to be sensible.
But I think as an early steer, even if it halved your customer service inquiries. But the one thing that really I've been excited by is that, so I do a lot of video and I do a lot of online tutorials, but I only speak English. So we are in 51 countries now. And yes, a lot of people around the world want to learn English. Actually, they don't mind learning in English, learning business in English, because that's fine. But if we have a mission to help access, 5 billion people, a lot of them don't speak English. But now with a lot of the different platforms, you can either create a virtual avatar of Anthony Rose or Steve Pugh.
Yep.
But also, for all of our videos, we have the transcript from what I've actually said. Yes, I would refine it, but then you can, in theory, feed that back in and have it in French and Hindi and Mandarin. And although at the moment it's still pretty clunky, and you can tell it's not a real person because it's all of the mannerisms and the things that just happen. But I can see where it's going to go. And one of the big things that I'm quite excited about, which law firms, I guarantee, will be quite slow to pivot. I just think they will be. University is the same for me, but it's that ability, as you say, to grow and scale in a way, because you'll make a punt, an educated risk on something that will either hit and or it won't. As well, I think a lot of people still, they're laggards. They sit in the mass market waiting to see what everyone else has done. But the truth is, after that horse has bolted, if people start to investigate new technology 2 years late, it's already gone. So I genuinely kind of respect and laud everything that you're doing. Actually, it's quite exciting to do that. We thought about something similar to do with solving business problems, because inherently for most business problems, there is actually a structure for what you should do. But the one thing that we found in a world of ChatGPT, people still want to ask a human. They know what the answer is, and ChatGPT can tell them what the answer should be, but they want to know, how did you solve that, Anthony, in your career when you had this? And that's the magic that I don't think we have yet, but we will. Can I pick your brain?
And by the way, very briefly, I was in Singapore 10 days ago, meeting with our Singapore team, and one of the startups in our building very nicely did a 3D model of me. So they've created this 360 camera thing with 82 ultra HD cameras and this massive splash that like you're being transported in the Matrix somewhere. Anyway, I haven't yet seen this model, but I was doing like the Matrix pose. So I've no idea, actually. I didn't check who owns the copyright on it, but it turns out there's an Anthony on the internet that's like, oh my God, I've lost control of myself. So
but when you have deep fake technology, you can see where, and this is at the moment stuff that we know about. Obviously, there'll be a lot of military stuff that we don't know about. But fast forward 20 years, I'm excited to see where it's going to go. Part of me does worry. So I'm based in the northeast of England. We have a lot of industry here. And it's that balance of where I think some companies will hit again with AI and do extremely well. You'll have people that don't and therefore go out of business because they quite literally just can't compete with stuff. And I think that'll be quite a painful transition for a while, because it'll take a while for people to react and change. And in the same way that we don't have as many people that plough fields now as we did 100 years ago, people will find new jobs. But I can see turmoil ahead in some different ways. Can I ask your brains, pick your brains almost about where you feel what's going on in finance at the moment and how that almost impacts the startup landscape? Because obviously we had Silicon Valley Bank kind of go under, and they got saved in the UK by HSBC. But then there's Credit Suisse, and I watch a lot of Bloomberg, and it's that balance of where 2-3 years ago, it seemed like it wasn't mega difficult to raise investment if you had a good idea and a good business. Do you feel that the world has changed a bit? Are people a bit more cautious now than they were in the past?
Great point. By the way, Silicon Valley Bank, we've got data on thousands of UK startups, and in the shareholders agreement, when you do a funding round on SeedLegals, you put your bank details so that the investors can send you their money. But by looking at the sort code, we can see what banks people use. And I can tell you, on early stage UK startups, just 1.3% of companies use SVB. Starling is the most popular
Okay.
by a long way. So, the whole fuss about SVB was about larger companies, not smaller ones. And for the average, it's not to say it's not significant. And I'm delighted the government worked full time over the weekend to get it sorted. It would have been very bad otherwise. But for your average startups, they go SV who? So, but there is a fundamental issue, and the fundamental issue is the cost of capital. So once upon a time, not that many years ago, your money was earning 0% interest in the bank. So because you were earning nothing in the bank, you could easily borrow money and you would want to get a return. So you would invest in startups, which have a risk. But now if the bank is, costing you 8%, which means your money is doubling every 9 years, or the amount you owe is doubling every 9 years, if you're investing in a startup, you want to invest at a lower valuation so that it doesn't have to rise as much before you make a return. And you want to pick the ones that are more likely to succeed so that you reduce your risk. So the fundamental thing that's changed, in my view, is the cost of capital. It's more expensive to borrow and you would get more in interest. Therefore, you're going to take smaller and less risky bets. So with that in mind, investors are changing their strategy. They're pushing valuations down and they're picking safer bets. And the safer bets are usually things like fintech as opposed to B2C businesses or social networks. So if you're a fintech with a SaaS recurring revenue business model and all the jargon that's hot with investors, then probably not that much has changed. In fact, there might be more money moving to your area. You may have to raise at a lower valuation. But if you're a bit off-piste, then you may have a much harder time getting investment because you're competing with much safer bets potentially.
Because this, for me, in some ways goes back to what we said right at the start, where in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, if you ignored certain bubbles, you had to build a proper business first. Does that make sense? And it's almost where, are there zombie companies out there that maybe, borrowed money extremely cheaply, they grew, but not profitably. And when that tap gets turned off, could they be in trouble? It's almost
that's exactly it. And that's the other part that's changed, which is, and it becomes, by the way, a running joke with me and my business partner. So, often having a co-founder is very useful because you have different views on the same problem. Sometimes you're in sync and sometimes not. And, over the years since we've been around, which is like 7 years at SeedLegals, we joke, which is, for me, we should raise tons of money and grow like crazy. And my business partner, who ironically is the investor, serial angel investors, don't do that. Do not be on the treadmill of having to keep raising or you're out of business. Get to cash flow break even. In other words, not burning a huge amount of money. You don't have to aim to be profitable, but not losing a huge amount, so that you're not beholden to investors. And during the boom times, I go, Laurent, I was right. It's crazy. We should have raised tons. And then along came COVID and Brexit, and then everything went south. And then Laurent would go, see, Anthony, I was right. So, but what has fundamentally changed is investors are looking for companies that are cash flow break even / profitable, not losing huge amounts, because they know if they're investing and you need to then raise tons more at a lower valuation, they're going to be diluted. And so, underpinned by the changes in the cost of capital, you now have big mood swings from investors. And then the question is, how long will it be until they correct it? I think one of the other side effects is that because valuations are down, investors know the companies often, not exclusively, but often fundraising now are the ones that are forced to fundraise rather than the ones that can do it because they're awesome and want to. And of course, the ones who just want to and are really awesome will anyway. But the fact that you're fundraising and calling investors might mean that they are dictating the
Got
terms.
you.
And then the question is, can you hold out till, is it Q3? Is it Q4? Is it next year? Is it next month? No one really knows, what the holding period is until it comes back again. But historically, everything is always a cycle. And so for sure, the cycle will be back again. The question just is how long?
So if you were me or a startup founder and you could wait until next year to fundraise or whenever, would you, or would you raise now? Because you never know what's going to happen, even though it's at a much lower valuation.
Of course. So it's a great point. And the rule one with startups is procrastination is death.
Okay.
So, you have a dream, you want to do something, you're either going to get on with doing it or you're not. And if you don't, well, it depends how passionate you are. But if one day you wake up and see someone else is going to do it or is doing it, will you be endlessly annoyed with yourself, or will you go, meh, whatever? So, I mean, the fact is, if you are going to be, if you think about in some number of years of development, I want to have a company that's worth 100 million pounds and do X or Y. Well, the question is, when does the clock start? If you're not starting now, it's just going to start later. And if you're not laser focused on growing it as efficiently as you can, then you're wasting everyone's time, really. So I think it's one of the key attributes as a founder is when there are uncertain times, you take advantage of it. So you change your fundraising strategy. You pick something that's perhaps more investable. You look to raise smaller amounts and get there. Instead of hiring 8 people on day one, hire 4 people, or build something yourself, or use no code to get there. Instead of trying to do a funding round and raising £500,000, get on SeedLegals and use what's called a seed fast to raise small amounts ahead of a round. So you don't need to wait months trying to find all the investors to come together. You get a few investors. If you had £20,000 now, you could get the prototype built. Or if you had 50,000, you could hire the developer. So it's all about changing your strategy, working super hard to find investors, and that's being completely shameless, spreading on social, friends, customers, whoever will listen, what you're doing and why they should invest, and your pitch deck and business plan, and telling them about the SIS tax savings. So I think that not going ahead is not really the answer, because the other thing is you always think that something will be better, but guess what? When fundraising valuations are increasing again, all that's going to happen is all the companies who are much further developed that didn't fundraise will be right at the front of the queue, and you'll realize now is a lousy time for you. So there's always a lousy time. Maybe the corollary is things will always be worse. This is as good as it's ever going to get. There goes my optimism award.
No,
okay, yes.
I love it. I love it. I am very conscious of your time, Anthony. I know how busy you are and how many things and wheels and things that you spin. I have 2 questions that I kind of finish on, if that's okay.
Sure.
Would you be happy to share what's the best piece of advice you've ever had? Apart from fundraise now on SeedLegals, is the
Yeah, no. Well, in fundraising space, I think it's probably don't raise a huge amount, because you're always seduced by those TechCrunch articles of companies raising large amounts, and it always seems that it's a mark of respect that you've raised more, but actually raising less is often better, because you don't spend it on building lots of things that you don't need later. So you realize maybe that fundraising is the failure to not have to fundraise. If you could build everything without having to raise, that would be better. You raise because you needed the money. So I think in previous startups, I raised successfully very large amounts, but I might have been better off to raise smaller amounts and operate more efficiently.
No, it's good. It's good. And then last but not least, if you were to give advice to your younger self, and this could be yourself at 16 with a soldering board, making circuit boards and selling them, hustling away, or the iPlayer days, maybe after you left that, or at that first dinner party where you met your business partner. If you were to give advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I saw that in the podcast, and I planned to have an answer for it, and I didn't have an answer. I don't offhand have like an answer of like, don't drink the green stuff or whatever. um, I think life is hard to have undone one thing without undoing all other things, because you might look back and say, had I not been with Kazar, then I wouldn't have had embroiled in endless amounts of, their legal drama or something. But if it hadn't been that, it wouldn't have led to the next thing and the next thing. And if I hadn't met that investor, it wouldn't have met my
Hmm.
co-founder now. So I think it's very hard to just take this history and remove one thing from history to redo it. So unfortunately, of all the things you've asked, maybe the most significant one, I don't have an answer on it.
But I think what's quite funny is that for my career and a lot of people I speak to, there's a term squiggly careers, but it's almost where all of those pivots and changes throughout your entire life have built the Anthony Rose as of now. Same with me. So that almost created the magic. It's the chaos which has got you to this point. But no, I respect the answer. I think it's really good. And genuinely, I think it's brilliant what you guys are doing and the way that you support the community. I was really impressed. And this is maybe a small thing, but the fact that you travelled from London to Newcastle on a Saturday when you didn't have to come and speak to a room of 30, 40 people, it shows that you really care about what you do. And for me, that really kind of comes across when you speak. And I think people will buy into that often when you work with a company or you trust your money somewhere, you often look at the character of the people and are they passionate about what they talk to and what they do. And I think that comes across really well. And actually you've managed to drop in SeedLegals more than any guest of all time, just in a very good. It's good.
Well, thank you. And by the way, I mean, I'm not that young, and I personally would love to give back to the community and share things. So, it's with pleasure. London is, fundraising is very London centric. So to get out of town and, work with founders elsewhere to tap into that space, I enjoy very much doing.
Cool. Well, I genuinely appreciate your time. Have a wonderful rest of your Monday. I will stay in touch on the socials, and when this gets clipped up, I'll tag you in some of the posts as well.
All right.
Cool. Well, have a great
Fantastic.
rest of your day, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, cheers. Bye-bye.